we humans have accomplished incredible things. We've landed spacecraft on Mars, sequenced thousands of genomes, and discovered planets at the edge of space-time. Yet, when it comes to understanding ourselves, there's an enormous amount we simply don't know. Science writer Carl Zimmer put it this way in 2003. What we don't know about our evolution vastly outweighs what we do know. Three major puzzles continue to frustrate researchers. First, the mystery of our sudden emergence. Around 46,000 years ago, something dramatic happened in the Mediterranean Levant, what is now Israel, Lebanon, and surrounding areas. For over 6 million years, archaic humans had survived without art, without complex language, without symbolic thinking. Then, in a geological blink of an eye, everything changed. Between 40,000 and 45,000 years ago, the material culture of Western Eurasia transformed more than it had during the previous million years. What makes this particularly puzzling is that similar bursts of innovation had appeared elsewhere and then vanished. In southern Africa, two advanced cultures emerged around 72,000 and 65,000 years ago, each lasting only a few thousand years before disappearing. The region returned to simpler Stone Age technology for another 30,000 years. The Levantan transition was different. It spread across 3 continents and never looked back. The second great puzzle is our bodies. We share 99% of our protein-coding genes with chimpanzees, yet we look remarkably different. Why are humans the only primate with virtually no body hair? The usual explanation about cooling down on the African savanna doesn't hold up. Baboons, lions, and tigers all retain their fur in the same hot climates. Why do women have permanently enlarged breasts when other primates only develop them during nursing? Why did we evolve hidden ovulation, making it impossible to know when a female is fertile? Why the pronounced chin, the protruding nose, the smooth skin? The third mystery is our behavior. We're the only species that wears jewelry, plays music, cries tears, and fears the dark. We're also the only species that builds intercontinental ballistic missiles. Evolutionary psychologist Steven Pinker notes that war remains an enigma. Why do people volunteer for activities with an excellent chance of getting them killed? Some researchers have proposed a major genetic mutation around 50,000 years ago. But transforming a Middle Paleolithic brain into a modern human mind would require thousands of genetic changes, not just one. Others point to climate change, but studies show no correlation between major climatic shifts and the appearance of modern human behavior. The Toba volcanic eruption 73,000 years ago has been suggested, but there's a 26,000-year gap before the Levantan transition. What makes these questions more than academic is their urgency. The power humans now wield over this planet is unprecedented. Understanding why we do what we do, why xenophobia, war, and ecological destruction persist alongside art, music, and love, may be essential to our survival. The evidence points to the Mediterranean Levant as humanity's epicenter. Something happened there that didn't happen anywhere else. Some environmental factor, call it Factor X, made it imperative for archaic humans to acquire the features that define us today. Identifying that factor may be the most important question facing our generation. What could possibly be powerful enough to reshape an entire species in such a short time? What could kill off every ancestor who didn't develop art, language, and complex thought? The answer might be simpler than we think, and it might be far more unsettling. Imagine a time when our ancestors were not the hunters, but the hunted. For most of our history, the greatest force shaping life on Earth was the constant threat of becoming food. This pressure is nature's most powerful engine of change, crafting everything from the chameleon's color shift to the cheetah's speed. But what if this same force shaped us? The common story is man the hunter, a predator at the top of the food chain. But that view might actually hide our true origins. The evidence suggests that, for a crucial period, our ancestors evolved not as predators, but as prey. The defining traits of modern humans, our intelligence, our ability to speak, our unique bodies, may all be adaptations born from being systematically hunted by a single, formidable predator. The prime suspect, the Neanderthal. For over 50,000 years, in the Levant region, archaic humans and Eurasian Neanderthals lived side by side. According to Gauss's law, two similar species competing for the same caves, food, and resources cannot indefinitely occupy the same space. Competition becomes the fiercest between those most alike. This sets the stage for a struggle with the highest stakes: extinction. The Neanderthals who moved into this territory were not the simple brutes of popular myth. They were apex predators, evolved for hundreds of thousands of years in the harsh environments of Europe to be powerful, strategic hunters. This is the core of Neanderthal predation theory. It proposes that this competition acted as an intense evolutionary catalyst. From the perspective of the smaller, more vulnerable archaic humans, the arrival of these powerful cousins was a new and overwhelming selective pressure. Every generation for thousands of years, those who could better evade, outthink, or defend against this specific threat were the ones who survived and passed on their traits. This pressure, the theory argues, is what drove the abrupt transition from archaic hominids to fully modern humans. It suggests that our high intelligence, our capacity for complex language and art, even our relative hairlessness, are the evolutionary legacy of being prey. We carry the echoes of this ancient dynamic within us still. The unique trajectory of our species may not be a story of our dominance, but a story of our survival against a predator that was, in many ways, our equal. What did Neanderthals actually look like, and how did they live? For years, the image was simple: dim-witted cavemen shuffling through the Ice Age. Recent science, paints a very different picture. Neanderthals were not human. Genetic evidence confirms they split from our ancestral line, perhaps 500,000 years ago, evolving separately in the harsh climates of Ice Age Europe. This environment shaped them into something remarkable. Consider their physique. An average Neanderthal was incredibly stocky and weighed significantly more than a modern human, with skeletons built to support massive muscles. Estimates suggest they were about 6 times stronger. One anthropologist noted a healthy male could lift an NFL linebacker and throw him. Even their children possessed strength comparable to modern weightlifters. To maintain this large body mass in a freezing climate, they needed enormous amounts of energy. Isotope analysis of their bones reveals a diet composed almost entirely of meat. They consumed several pounds of fat-rich meat daily, obtained by hunting the largest, most dangerous animals on the planet: woolly mammoths, cave bears, and rhinos. Evidence of spear tips embedded in elephant ribs and horse vertebrae confirms they were skilled hunters, not scavengers. This predatory lifestyle demanded more than just strength. It required intelligence, courage, and strategy. The constant, dangerous confrontations with massive prey left a clear mark. Almost every adult Neanderthal skeleton examined shows evidence of healed fractures from close quarters encounters, and they rarely lived past 40. The image emerging is of a formidable predator, perfectly adapted to its environment. Neanderthals were a unique, complex species, carved by the demands of survival into the apex predators of the Ice Age. For years, evidence has piled up showing Neanderthals were pure carnivores, yet researchers have largely avoided exploring what that actually means. Perhaps it feels too uncomfortable to view our close relatives as predators. But the clues left behind in their caves tell a clear story. Animal bones at Neanderthal sites show they smashed skulls for brains and extracted tongues. They cracked open every bone for marrow, squeezing every possible nutrient from each carcass. Then there are the bones with cut marks that look different. At sites across Europe, in Croatia, France, and Spain, Neanderthal remains have been found with the same butchering patterns as the deer and other animals they ate. Limbs were dismembered. Long bones were shattered to get at the marrow. Skulls were carefully skinned. At a cave in northern Spain, the bones of 8 Neanderthals, from a baby to adults, showed clear signs of defleshing with stone tools. They were then discarded alongside animal remains, treated exactly the same way. At a French rock shelter, 3 more individuals met the same fate. Their arms were cut off at the shoulders, thigh muscles removed, tongues cut out. The bones were cracked open on stone anvils. What makes this particularly interesting is that these Neanderthals had fire. They could have cooked these meals, yet the bones show few signs of roasting. Either they preferred their food raw, or they removed the flesh before cooking it. At Croatia's Krapina site, over 800 Neanderthal bones have been found. Recent analysis with modern microscopes confirmed cut marks, percussion pits, and abrasion patterns consistent with removing flesh and fat. Some skulls had their ears removed, tongues cut out, and scalps peeled off. These findings confirm what some researchers suspected over a century ago. Neanderthals practiced cannibalism, at least occasionally. This makes sense for a top predator trying to survive. When food grew scarce during European winters, every source of protein mattered. The logical question becomes whether Eurasian Neanderthals also hunted the early humans living in the Levant. If Neanderthals pursued every large animal in their territory, even mammoths, bears, and lions, would they have ignored another upright primate when preferred game was scarce? Modern carnivores offer some insight. Lions and hyenas don't kill because they hate their prey. The excitement of the hunt exists, but the kill itself is quick and efficient. It isn't personal. From a survival perspective, it's just meat. There are other dimensions to consider. Among social predators like wolves, lions, and chimpanzees, groups will sometimes enter neighboring territories specifically to attack rivals. They move silently, find a vulnerable individual, and kill quickly. The objective is simply eliminating competitors. Chimpanzees also demonstrate intense territorial behavior. Males patrol borders and attack intruders with remarkable violence. The larger the territory, the more resources it contains. Modern humans show the same patterns, from tribal warfare to national borders defended at any cost. Archaeological evidence suggests Neanderthals maintained distinct territories too. In Italy, different groups used different stone sources, with no overlap between regions. In the Levant, Neanderthals occupied forested highlands, while humans stayed in coastal lowlands. Each species kept to its own area. So why didn't Middle Paleolithic humans ever colonize Europe during the 500,000 years Neanderthals lived there? Possibly because they couldn't. A determined, well-armed predator species already occupied that ground and wasn't letting anyone in. When Neanderthals entered the Levant, they encountered humans who may have seemed less aggressive, easier targets than fellow Neanderthals. For a species already comfortable with lethal group violence, territorial expansion, and dietary cannibalism, the choice of who to confront would have been straightforward. The implications for those early human populations would have been significant and lasting. What was Neanderthal sex like? Did couples fall in love by the fire, or was it more primal? Researchers actually know very little because soft tissue and private behaviors don't survive in fossils. To find answers, we look at human sexuality. Humans are the only primates with romantic love, lifelong bonds, and permanent breasts. These features are exclusive to our species, since Neanderthals didn't share our art or complex language. Assuming they shared our romance is speculation. Their mating system likely remained closer to the primate model. Female ovulation cycles would trigger hormonal responses in males. This also sparked intense competition, with dominant males fighting for access to females. Observations of modern primates show intimidation and coercion are common tactics. For the sex act itself, it would have been highly motivated but mechanistic. The objective was ensuring the strongest males passed on their genes. Early humans at skullcalves likely followed the same system. Because modern human behavior emerged recently, romantic love probably came late in our evolution. Both species were almost certainly sexually compatible. Pheromones from human females would have attracted Neanderthal males. This creates a powerful scenario: direct competition for the same females. Neanderthals were proficient hunters and formidable competitors. Human female scents could be detected over long distances, potentially drawing aroused Neanderthal males to their camps. The skullcalves humans were more cautious, adapted to surviving predators rather than being top predators. In confrontation, Neanderthals had the advantage. Primate societies normally avoid incest by dispersing females. With Neanderthals in the territory, this became dangerous. Human females faced abduction, while males were powerless. Natural selection doesn't care about fairness. For Neanderthals, accessing new females introduced fresh genes. For the skullcalves people, this conflict threatened their entire community. The popular image of Neanderthals shows them as hairier versions of modern humans. Some scientists have even suggested a cleaned-up Neanderthal in a business suit could blend in on a New York subway. But where does this idea come from? Anthropologist Judith Berman traced this familiar caveman image not to scientific evidence, but to medieval European art. This anthropomorphic view has simply continued into modern culture. To understand what Neanderthals actually looked like, we need to consider the environment they lived in. These hominins evolved in Ice Age Europe and survived there for hundreds of thousands of years. Climate shaped their behavior and their bodies. Scientists recognize Neanderthals had cold-adapted features, short limbs, compact torsos, and large noses, all designed to minimize heat loss. This stocky build appears in people living in Arctic regions today. Now consider body hair. Every warm-blooded mammal living in similar icy climates today has thick fur. Cold-adapted primates like Japanese macaques grow extra long coats and even develop thicker winter fur. All large mammals in Pleistocene Europe had long, thick hair. If every other animal needed fur to survive, it makes sense Neanderthals did too. Archaeological sites show no evidence of tailored clothing. No eyed needles have ever been found with Neanderthal remains, suggesting they couldn't sew the fitted garments needed for extreme cold. complex clothing, body hair would have been their primary protection. This paints a different picture. Neanderthals likely retained ancestral primate body hair that grew longer and denser in glacial Europe, possibly with a seasonal winter coat. Their faces would have looked different too. Large protruding ears lose heat and risk frostbite. Natural selection favored small, furry ears close to the head. The flat, broad nose seen in other primates would have been retained, as protruding features were vulnerable to freezing. An objective look at the evidence suggests Neanderthals appeared more like tall, hairy apes suited to their Ice Age world than modern humans in fur clothing. Have you ever wondered what it was like to be a Neanderthal? New thinking suggests their world was dominated by darkness. Because many prey animals are easier to catch at night, it's likely these ancient hunters adapted to a nocturnal lifestyle. This single idea could explain some of their most mysterious features. Take their enormous noses. The nasal aperture in a Neanderthal skull is much larger than a human's. This would have housed extra olfactory tissue, giving them a powerful sense of smell to track prey in the dark. This feature also forced their entire midface to jut forward, creating what scientists call a Neanderthal snout. Then there are the eyes. Their huge eye sockets would have held large eyes capable of gathering maximum light. To protect these sensitive night-adapted eyes from glaring snow, they likely developed heavy, arched brow ridges, acting like natural sun visors. They may have even possessed a reflective layer behind the retina, causing their eyes to glow in torchlight, just like a cat's. Even the shape of their skull tells a story. The prominent bulge at the back, known as the Neanderthal bun, may have housed an expanded visual cortex to process all that low-light information. While they were likely deep-voiced and not capable of complex speech, their sensory abilities were unmatched. They were the ultimate apex predators of the Ice Age, perfectly equipped for a world of shadows. To see Neanderthals accurately, the old habit of viewing them as human must be set aside. Forensic reconstructions work for people because the facial features are known. Applying the same method to Neanderthals is a mistake. A chimpanzee skull gives no clue about its flat nose, and a proboscis monkey's skull reveals nothing of its enormous nose. Both features are made of soft tissue, yet Neanderthals are consistently given human noses, eyes, and skin. A more logical view is that they retained their ancestral primate form. They were not smooth-skinned or clear-eyed. Approaching one would be like encountering a powerful, fur-covered figure with large eyes, a muzzle, and tremendous muscle. This was a creature unlike any human, adapted for a very different world. Imagine a creature with the raw power of a gorilla, yet capable of crafting stone tools. This was the reality for our ancestors 100,000 years ago. Neanderthals had brains larger than humans, but left behind no art or jewelry. This contradiction led anthropologists to describe them as wolves with knives. For the humans of the Levant, this was bewildering. Facing a slightly shorter opponent that was 6 times stronger, with intelligence and weaponry, created a new kind of terror. This was a multi-dimensional threat involving lethal raiding, resource competition, and even sexual competition. The unpredictable nature of attacks generated intense psychological stress. When Neanderthals raided at night using superior vision, the human response was pure panic, a desperate urge to flee. Those who ran survived and passed on that instinct. This is why panic remains so deeply embedded in human experience. In the aftermath, survivors faced grief and hypervigilance, never able to relax. Studies of modern trauma show how deeply such experiences affect us. The constant stress would have triggered symptoms we now recognize as depression and anxiety. This shared ordeal forged a new concept, them and us. It became an adaptive way to identify friend from foe. For 50,000 years, awareness of this predator was central to survival. Life was no longer safe. Humans existed as one half of a malevolent relationship, always watching, always afraid. The Garden of Eden had become the killing fields. From this cauldron of fear and trauma, modern humans began to emerge, shaped by the profound experience of being hunted. Could love bloom in the Paleolithic? One theory suggests Eurasian Neanderthals interacted with skull calves of humans, leading to 3 potential outcomes. First, their encounters would create hybrid offspring displaying traits from both species. Second, this interaction would gradually reduce the human population. Third, only humans with specific traits allowing them to withstand this pressure would survive to become the founders of modern humanity. Evidence for this hybridization appears in the fossils themselves. Levantan Neanderthals show surprisingly human-like features, while skull calves, human remains, display distinct Neanderthal characteristics, like thick brow ridges. Anthropologists examining these specimens note remarkable similarities between the groups. Some researchers even suggest the Teshiktash infant skull represents an intermediate form between classic Neanderthals and early modern humans, though definitive DNA evidence from the region remains elusive. Imagine a population of early humans in the Levant, living in the same region as Neanderthals for thousands of years. The predator-prey cycle explains what happened next. Predators keep hunting prey until the prey population drops so low it's no longer worth the effort. At that point, predators must find other options, and the prey population gets a chance to recover. This dynamic points to something significant, a population bottleneck or near extinction event. When prey numbers fall dramatically, the survivors face intense pressure. On the Galapagos Islands, researchers watched this happen with finches. During a drought, 85% died. Only those with larger beaks survived. When the drought ended every new bird had that trait. For our ancestors, a similar event may have been the doorway through which modern humans emerged. On one side, primitive Stone Age people. On the other, fully human, smart, and articulate. The archaeological record shows Levantan people using Middle Paleolithic tools until around 55,000 years ago. Then, 46,000 to 47,000 years ago, Upper Paleolithic culture appears. This suggests the bottleneck was most extreme around 49,000 years ago. Genetic evidence confirms this timing. Studies show humans have far less genetic variation than chimpanzees, 4 times less. One group of 55 chimps in West Africa has twice the genetic diversity of all 6 billion humans on Earth. This points to a severe population crash. Research indicates the human population dropped to as few as 50 individuals. For 400 years, our ancestors hung on the edge of extinction. Dating of genetic mutations places this event between 37,000 and 53,000 years ago, matching the archaeological evidence. This explains why humans worldwide are so similar. From Timbuktu to Tallahassee, we share the same fundamental nature. We all descend from that small group of survivors who passed through the near extinction event and emerged as modern humans. What if everything that makes us uniquely human came down to one thing? Survival against a terrifying predator. All the evidence points to a near extinction event in our past, but what actually caused it? The answer lies in understanding the pressure cooker of evolution. When our ancestors faced relentless predation, the ones who survived weren't the strongest or smartest. They were the ones who adapted. And adapt they did through 4 powerful forces working together. Natural selection did its work silently. The slow, the reckless, the unwary simply vanished from the gene pool. Meanwhile, positive traits like speed, coordination, and intelligence were preserved. Sexual selection added another layer. Imagine choosing a mate based on how unlike the terrifying predator they appeared. Our ancestors actively avoided anyone who looked or behaved like the enemy, gradually breeding those traits out of existence. Then came artificial selection, wielded by coalitionary males who enforced the boundaries of who was us versus them. Through banishment and lethal violence against those considered too similar to the predator, they accelerated change at remarkable speed. Finally, genetic drift locked everything in place. The tiny surviving population became a closed breeding circle where new traits spread rapidly. This 4-pronged assault, metaselection, transformed our ancestors into something the world had never seen. It created every major feature that distinguishes humans from other primates. It made us who we are. Imagine being a prey species where misidentifying a predator means death. For early humans encountering Neanderthals, this was daily life. They were bipedal, roughly human-shaped, and somewhat similar in appearance. In those critical moments of recognition, any feature that helped distinguish friend from foe became a matter of life and death. This identification challenge triggered the ultimate makeover of the human body. Consider body hair. Coming from Africa, early humans likely had protective coats. But when they met the thicker-furred Neanderthals, that hairiness became a liability. If you could spot a Neanderthal by their dense coat from a distance, you could escape. This created a shift. Less hairy individuals were easier to identify as human, making them more likely to survive and reproduce. Hairy individuals faced real danger, ostracism, or worse. Over generations, genes for thick body hair were gradually removed. Women became even less hairy than men because males controlled this selection process. Today's universal preference for hairlessness carries echoes of this ancient dynamic. Genetic studies show humans began wearing clothing around 107,000 years ago, exactly when Neanderthal contact began. As body hair disappeared, clothing evolved to maintain body temperature. Our distinctive walk tells a similar story. Neanderthal skeletons reveal they moved differently, bow-legged, with restricted upper body rotation. For humans, walking like that was dangerous. So individuals with flowing strides were preferred as mates. Today, that walk is universal. No human culture prefers a slouched, hunched-over gait. Even our curved spines may trace to this period. While other primates have straighter spines, humans developed an S-shaped curve, despite back pain risks. Viewed from the side, that curve created a silhouette distinctly different from Neanderthals. It became desirable. The hourglass figure follows the same logic. From a distance, that curvy shape is unmistakably human. Perhaps nowhere is this makeover more evident than in the face. Humans are obsessive face watchers, subliminally scanning for threats. Neanderthals had primate-like features, weak chins, asymmetrical faces, pronounced brow ridges. So humans evolved in the opposite direction. We developed protruding noses, clear eye whites, pronounced chins, facial symmetry. They're the result of generations preferring mates who looked least like Neanderthals. Today, when someone finds a symmetrical face attractive or instinctively dislikes a weak chin, they're expressing preferences forged 100,000 years ago. When women face greater pressure to remove body hair than men, it's ancient survival strategy still shaping human behavior. The Neanderthals are gone, but their greatest legacy lives on in how we look, how we move, and what we find beautiful. What if the way we experience love, jealousy, and even modesty was shaped by fear? The fear of being hunted. This is the story of how our ancient ancestors had to reinvent what it meant to be human, simply to survive. Neanderthals were stronger, and the most profound threat was sexual. They were aggressively competing for mates, and this pressure threatened to wipe out the human population entirely. To survive, humans needed to become sexually invisible to Neanderthals. It was evolution's response to a crisis. The old way of doing things had to go. For millions of years, primate mating was obvious. Females displayed clear signs when they were fertile, but these signals were like a dinner bell for Neanderthals. So natural selection began dismantling the old system piece by piece. One of the first shifts was the rise of patriarchy. Fear of Neanderthal rivals created a deep need for control. Males began enforcing strict rules on female behavior, monogamy, fidelity, and modesty. Any woman who strayed put the whole group at risk. This hypervigilance became embedded in the male psyche, explaining the intense sexual jealousy that is uniquely human. Public sex was out. It attracted the wrong attention. Humans began seeking privacy, making sex a clandestine act. Frontal copulation became preferred, perhaps to distance themselves from the aggressive mating style of Neanderthals. Look at the human body itself. We lost most of our body hair to look less like our rivals, but we kept hair under our arms and in the pubic area. This helped trap scent, making it harder for a keen-nosed predator to track us. Even the monthly cycle changed. Menstruation created a scent trail. The solution was remarkable. Women began synchronizing their cycles. This meant the heightened risk was concentrated into just a few days. Perhaps the most ingenious adaptation was concealed ovulation. In the primate world, fertility is an advertisement. In humans, it became a secret. By hiding all the signs of being fertile, women drastically reduced the chances of attracting unwanted attention. This created a massive problem. If males couldn't tell when a woman was fertile, how would the species reproduce? The answer was romantic love. Love ensures that a pair bonds and engages in frequent sex throughout the month. This constant connection meant conception would happen eventually, without risky signals. Love transformed sex from a brief act into a deep emotional bond. It also brought fathers into the picture, dedicated protectors who would risk their lives for their families. This new system achieved the near impossible. It made humans sexually incompatible with Neanderthals. The old signals were gone. The scent cues were masked. The visual triggers were hidden. Neanderthals simply lost interest. This revolution explains so much about who we are today. The deep feelings of jealousy, the universal standards of modesty, the preference for privacy, and our capacity for romantic love. All of these may be legacies of an ancient struggle. Our most cherished emotions were forged in a crucible of survival, shaping a species that learned the most intimate parts of life could also be the key to outlasting the darkness. Imagine settling down for the night in a cave, surrounded by family. The fire crackles, but it offers little comfort. The darkness outside is a reminder that you are prey. For thousands of generations, this fear of the night was a constant companion, a deep-seated anxiety passed down through countless nights. Now, fast forward to today. A parent soothes a child afraid of the dark, insisting the boogeyman isn't real. But where do these fears come from? Research shows that a vast majority of young children report nighttime fears, monsters, intruders, and shadows. Interestingly, these fears are more prevalent in girls, which aligns with the idea that specific members of a group may have been more vulnerable in our distant past. To survive the nightly threat, our ancestors developed unique adaptations. Human sleep cycles between deep and light sleep every 90 minutes. During light sleep, we remain semi-aware, our senses still connected to the brain's alarm system. In a group, this meant someone was always partially awake, ready to sound the alert. But the most crucial safeguard may have been a four-legged one. Wolves, drawn to camps for food, eventually formed a bond with humans. Those that were tamer could provide a service humans couldn't: a nose and ears far more sensitive than their own, offering a silent, early warning system in the dark. Genetic evidence now suggests this partnership began over 100,000 years ago, right when it was needed most. This alliance may be the very reason we are here today, explaining the profound and ancient bond that truly makes the dog our best friend. When prey species cannot outrun four-legged hunters, natural selection takes a different path. But when the predator is another bipedal human, even small advantages in speed and agility become matters of life and death. This explains why between 100,000 and 45,000 years ago, human populations developed the athletic traits we see in elite sports today. Genetic analysis confirms over 100 regions of our genome underwent recent changes, particularly those affecting muscle tissue. Skeletons from this period tell the same story. Bones became lighter and more gracile, trading raw power for agility and speed. Living under constant threat reshaped more than just bodies. Identifying friend from foe became essential for survival. When strangers could be predators, caution became hardwired into human nature. Groups learned to stay together, recognizing that isolation meant vulnerability. Women were escorted during foraging. Communities formed larger tribal units where collective safety replaced individualism. The psychological toll was immense. Constant vigilance created persistent anxiety. Yet this pressure also forged something remarkable: a resilient central nervous system capable of surviving trauma that would kill other primates. Humans became uniquely shock-proof, able to endure conditions that prove fatal to even the largest animals. These defensive adaptations allowed our ancestors to survive for 50 millennia. How did traumatic encounters with Neanderthals shape the instincts modern humans carry today? This question is central to understanding our own nature. Some adaptations were physical, but many became innate. Fears, preferences, and emotional responses, now part of human nature. The question is how these responses were encoded into our ancestors' DNA and inherited by us. Ethology offers insight. Scientists identified fixed action patterns, instinctive behaviors triggered by specific cues called sign stimuli. A physical feature, sound, or environmental signal can release an innate response. Applying this to human evolution, the theory suggests we inherited such patterns from Levantan ancestors. Prominent brow ridges, hunched shoulders, darkness, or caves could act as triggers, eliciting reactions that once helped avoid danger. But how were these responses originally encoded? Random mutations cannot explain complex instincts. They code for physical traits, not behavioral information drawn from the environment. Team theory proposes an answer. Intense emotions from traumatic experiences can be imprinted into non-coding DNA. If an ancestor survived a Neanderthal attack, the emotional memory could be inherited by descendants. An innate fear of dark forests or aversion to certain physical traits may originate from a traumatic encounter generations ago. If the response proved adaptive, it became fixed in the population. Predation is deeply traumatic. Survivors and even witnesses experienced emotions powerful enough to encode these inherited packages, called teams. Over millennia, this process embedded numerous Neanderthal-related responses into the human genome. This biological mechanism reveals the depth of trauma our ancestors endured and explains the instincts that still influence us today in subtle ways. In the fossil record of the Levant, we see a population in decline. Despite developing defensive strategies, the skull calves, people were heading toward extinction. But then, things changed radically. Darwinian theory explains what happened. As the population plunged, the weak were eliminated from the gene pool. This created intense pressure for a new kind of adaptation. Defensive strategies were no longer working. To survive, this population needed to go on the offensive. Natural selection favored strategic adaptations. These were offensive. Their purpose was to empower humans to engage their enemy in combat and defeat them. The objective was the complete removal of their ecological competitors. A small, timid prey species needed to turn the tables on the top predator. Individuals born with traits that allowed them to outcompete their enemies lived to pass on those genes. For the first time, some individuals did not run. They stood their ground. They lost many people, but this concentrated advantageous traits. A new type of human was emerging. These strategic adaptations included high intelligence, courage, male bonding, aggression, language, organization, and the ability to form coalitions. A new mindset unified the group into a cohesive force. Courage and proactive aggression are rare in prey species. In hand-to-hand combat, these became essential. Groups that encountered an injured enemy could work themselves into a frenzied state and dispatch them. This intense emotion became encoded and passed down. The sight of an enemy would trigger the same aggression in future generations. In this context, risk-taking became heroic. Those who defended the group were praised and sought after as partners. The genes for courage spread through the community. Attitudes toward killing also changed. These humans killed animals for food, but now they had to kill another hominid without hesitation. They needed to perceive their enemy as subhuman. Administering the final blow became easy. This lack of mercy was adaptive. There were no rules of engagement. Cruelty was favored. Male bonding and obedience to leadership became essential. Discipline is key to military success. All these traits were advantageous. Language also played a critical role. Basic communication sufficed for everyday needs. But when forming proto-armies, complex linguistic skills became necessary. Spoken language allowed warriors to communicate tactics, plan ambushes, and coordinate movements. Intelligence about enemy numbers could be shared. Tactics could be taught. Stories boosted morale. Language also created group identity. Creativity became highly adaptive. Creative individuals could invent new weapons. Innovations like spear throwers, nets, traps, and the bow and arrow required lateral thinking. Projectile weapons could be used from a safe distance, neutralizing the enemy's strength advantage. The archaeological record shows projectile point technology first appeared around 46,000 years ago in the Levant. These weapons were a leap from the heavy spears used by their adversaries. High intelligence fueled a cognitive arms race. But humans needed more. They needed to be scheming and crafty. This Machiavellian intelligence allowed for tactical deception and coalition forming. While most traits were acquired by both sexes, some were gender-specific. Women, with responsibility for child-rearing, expressed aggression indirectly. They developed manual dexterity for making weapons. They took over foraging, allowing men to devote time to combat. Before predation, humans lived in small family groups. The threat generated pressure to aggregate into larger groups. Larger groups needed order. This encouraged hierarchies. Society became a strategic adaptation. Scattered families of hunters gradually congregated to form a single interbreeding population. Their identity was forged around their ability to kill the enemy. As they interbred, their strategic adaptations concentrated, forming a warrior tribe. The tribal level increased their effectiveness, allowing them to reverse the predation dynamic. The hunter became the hunted. Scientific evidence supports this. A Neanderthal skeleton from the Levant shows injuries from a projectile point weapon, dated to approximately 46,900 years ago. The result was something the world had never seen before. This combination of characteristics became a defining part of who we are as a species. It was this transformation that allowed humans to finally reverse a long history of persecution and claim the top rung of the food chain. This turning point set the course for the next 50,000 years. The humans who emerged were no longer timid prey. They had become something unprecedented. For the Neanderthals who had once dominated them, this new breed must have seemed almost unrecognizable. This transformation gave rise to a new kind of human, often referred to as Cro-Magnon. These were not fully modern people as we know them today. They were bigger, stronger, and driven by instincts sharpened by thousands of years of conflict. Natural selection had favored the toughest, most aggressive individuals. Young males, in particular, were shaped by this pressure, developing hyperaggressive traits. This was a survival strategy in a world without rules. Empathy for outsiders was a disadvantage. With their new capabilities, these Cro-Magnon groups turned the tables on their ancestral rivals. What followed was a campaign driven by deep-seated instinct. Armed with advanced tools and tactics, they systematically displaced the Neanderthals. The fossil record shows that Neanderthals disappeared from the Levant shortly after the arrival of these new, technologically advanced humans. Climate change has been ruled out as a cause. The evidence points to a different story. Once their primary rivals were gone, this tightly bonded group of warriors turned inward. The very traits that made them successful, aggression, and a strong them and us mentality, began to fracture their own society. Leadership was constantly challenged, and the group split into factions. These factions then dispersed from the Levant, migrating into Europe, Asia, and even back into Africa. This was the beginning of a new chapter, one defined by expansion and the complex social dynamics that would come to shape the modern world. When Cro-Magnons first moved into Europe from the east around 44,000 years ago, they entered a continent that had belonged to another species for over 300,000 years. The Neanderthals were well established, physically powerful, and intimately familiar with every forest and mountain across millions of square kilometers. What followed was a protracted conflict that would span 20 millennia. The pattern of this encounter is written in the archaeological record. As Cro-Magnons advanced westward, Neanderthal remains disappear from site after site in the same direction at the same time. Eastern European populations vanished first, followed by those in France, Greece, Italy, and finally Spain. The correlation is consistent. Neanderthals only disappeared after modern humans entered their territory. The Neanderthals were formidable opponents. Their hunting skills, physical strength, and knowledge of the terrain made them dangerous adversaries. The enormous territory they occupied, stretching 10 million square kilometers, allowed groups to evade contact for long periods in dense forests and mountain refuges. These factors help explain why the conflict dragged on for 20,000 years. As their population declined under sustained pressure, something unexpected occurred among the survivors. Archaeological sites in France dating between 35,000 and 30,000 years ago reveal a sudden transition to Upper Paleolithic culture at Neanderthal locations. Stone tools, shell necklaces, and carved ivory appeared where only Mousterian artifacts had existed for hundreds of thousands of years. This late flowering, known as the Chalpironian, caught researchers by surprise. Physical changes accompanied this cultural shift. Analysis of late Neanderthal skeletons shows they were becoming more gracile, with locomotive patterns suggesting increased mobility and speed. In a sense, they were adapting to become more like their adversaries. The question of interbreeding between the species has been settled by genetic evidence. DNA extracted from multiple Neanderthal fossils across Europe shows no significant contribution to modern humans. The lineages had diverged approximately 300,000 years earlier, and little to no mixing occurred during their coexistence in Europe. While involuntary contact may have happened, it did not result in lasting genetic exchange. Skeletal evidence reveals the violence of this encounter. Healed injuries concentrated around the heads and upper bodies of Neanderthal remains, along with perifractures on arms, point to face-to-face combat. These patterns differ from hunting accidents. Direct evidence emerged from a French cave site where researchers discovered a Neanderthal jawbone among Cro-Magnon remains, showing cut marks from flint knives. Climate change does not explain their disappearance. Neanderthals were cold adapted and had survived extreme climatic shifts throughout their long existence. Research shows the most severe climate changes in Europe occurred thousands of years after the last Neanderthals vanished. Their extinction coincides instead with the geographic expansion of modern humans. The final survivors made their last stand at Goram's Cave in Gibraltar, pushed westward across the continent until they reached the Mediterranean Sea. From this vantage point, they could see across the strait to North Africa, their ancestral homeland. Carbon dates place them here until approximately 28,000 years ago, with some evidence suggesting survival until 24,000 years ago, when the last Neanderthal was gone. An extraordinary situation emerged. After more than 75,000 years of coexistence and conflict, humans occupied the continent alone for the first time. The long struggle had reached its conclusion, leaving one species in possession of a world that had once been shared. After conquering Europe, Cro-Magnons spread across 6 continents. But if these were our direct ancestors, why did it take another 40,000 years to invent writing, agriculture, or the wheel? Archaeologist Colin Renfrew calls this the sapiens paradox. How could physically modern humans exist for so long before showing signs of civilization? The answer lies in what Cro-Magnons carried beneath awareness. For 60,000 years, their ancestors survived Neanderthal predation through an inherited early warning system, emotional responses triggered by any sign of those fearsome creatures. When Neanderthals vanished, these responses sank into the subconscious. Picture a Cro-Magnon woman sizing up a mate. Too much body hair, no proper chin, hunched shoulders. Her subconscious screamed Neanderthal and sent waves of aversion without her ever knowing why. Men operated the same way, drawn to features that signaled safety. This unconscious screening happened everywhere humans migrated. On every continent, the same hidden criteria guided mate selection. Taller men got partners. Hairless women found mates. Features that triggered ancient alarms were weeded out. For 20,000 years after Neanderthals disappeared, humans used these triggers to make life or death decisions. Strangers who subliminally reminded them of the old enemy faced rejection. Those who passed were accepted. Generation after generation, this double filter pushed human physiology in the same direction everywhere. Regional variations, like skin color, emerged from environment. But the deep structure of human nature, the 99.9% of identical DNA, was shaped by this hidden force. We carry within us the ghosts of predators we've forgotten, still guiding who we love, who we fear, and who we've become. Imagine a time when survival depended on instant judgment. A group of Cro-Magnon hunters spots strangers across a clearing. In a fraction of a second, ancient impulses flood their minds. Friend or foe? For thousands of years, humans relied on instinctual emotional responses to identify Neanderthals. These gut feelings were fast and effective, but never perfect. After Neanderthals vanished, Cro-Magnon groups began encountering each other. Now, those same ancient triggers were aimed at other humans. Physical differences between groups, a different nose, a different posture, could accidentally fire those old alarms. What one person saw as harmless, another perceived as threat. Decisions about strangers were often made by young, aggressive males whose judgment was clouded by adrenaline. These were emotional mob reactions. When two equally paranoid groups met, violence was almost guaranteed. Each side was hardwired with an innate belief in its own superiority, a leftover from battles with Neanderthals. This made it easy to see the other group as fundamentally lesser. Minor differences became unbridgeable chasms. The archaeological record confirms this period of continuous conflict. Mass graves hold skeletons with crushed skulls, bodies pierced by stone arrowheads. Raids by young males targeted settlements for resources. This violence was unconscious selection, guided by ancient triggers operating worldwide. The targets were always the same, anyone perceived as different. Those with unusual features, nose too flat, lips too thin, stooped posture. Those whose behavior seemed off, humorless or awkward. Women were scrutinized closely. Newborns with atypical characteristics rarely survived. This systematic pressure shaped human physiology with incredible speed. Ironically, this pressure also selected for traits we celebrate. If Neanderthals were seen as artless and humorless, then art, music, and storytelling became signals of being one of us. The ability to crack a joke or decorate your body could save your life. Musical instruments were played as a stamp of shared humanity. As Cro-Magnons spread globally, they encountered other hominids, Homo erectus in Asia, Homo floresiensis in Indonesia. The ancient triggers fired again. One by one, every other hominid species disappeared from the fossil record, their extinction coinciding with human arrival. Every person alive traces ancestry to that original Cro-Magnon group. Our shared humanity, our art, music, and connection was shaped by this long, violent process. Some of our most cherished qualities were sharpened on the edge of our deepest, oldest fears. When Cro-Magnons returned to their ancestral homeland of Africa, the continent was far from empty. Vast and fertile, it teemed with a diverse population of hominids, from more primitive species to those using complex tools and red ochre. Unlike the Neanderthals of Europe, these groups shared the same ancestral environments as the returning Cro-Magnons. This reunion led to two distinct outcomes. Some primitive species were quickly driven to extinction. However, a different interaction occurred with others, particularly those displaying familiar cultural markers like body decoration. Driven by the desire for genetic diversity, dominant Cro-Magnon males likely mated with females they recognized as similar enough. This is supported by genetic evidence showing that long-separated African populations reunited around 40,000 years ago, exchanging genes. This interbreeding began a powerful process of artificial and sexual selection. Over 35,000 years, traits associated with a violent primate past were systematically pruned. The modern human face emerged, symmetrical and smooth. Body hair was nearly eliminated. Novel traits like blue eyes and blonde hair became prized markers of identity. Genetic analysis confirms this recent, rapid evolution, with up to 10% of the human genome altering in the last 100,000 years. By the dawn of the Neolithic, humanity had been sculpted into a single, uniform species, leaving only the final challenge of curving young male aggression to complete the transformation. Extreme aggression was once the key to survival. After the Neanderthals were gone, the very trait that helped Cro-Magnon men protect their families became a serious problem. By the Mesolithic era, violence was out of control. Skeletal evidence shows a massive spike in deadly injuries, proving that homicide was a daily fear. Family life was collapsing under the weight of constant warfare. But here is the surprising part. The more damage this unchecked aggression caused, the more pressure built for solutions. Nature began to fight back. The first solution was simple. The most violent men were often the first to die in battle. Studies of modern hunter-gatherer groups show that in some cases, up to 60% of men were killed in conflicts. This slowly removed the most aggressive genes from the population. Women also started making different choices. Living with a dangerously volatile partner became too risky. Instead of just seeking protectors, they began preferring kinder, more reliable men who would make better fathers. This shift in mate selection helped promote stability within families. The human brain also adapted. New cognitive networks emerged that allowed men to pause and think before reacting. For the first time, logic could override the primal urge to strike. A foreigner with different features might still be recognized as one of us, rather than an instant enemy. This paved the way for tolerance. Groups learned to accept minor differences in appearance and customs. This reduced conflict and allowed for trade, socializing, and interbreeding between tribes. It prevented humanity from splitting into separate species and gave rise to what we now call ethnic groups, populations that maintain their identity while remaining part of the larger human family. Throughout human history, the need for security has shaped how we live. In the Neolithic period, the most effective protection against group conflict was strength in numbers. Large defensive groups could outnumber and withstand raiding parties. This idea, proposed by ecologist Richard Alexander, suggests early humans formed extended groups as defense against other humans. However, moving from bands of 50 to settlements of thousands required new skills. People needed systems to store food, resolve disputes, and prevent aggressive individuals from taking over. Yet there was a practical problem. Nomadic hunter-gatherers could not build permanent defenses. Their small groups were vulnerable when encountering roaming bands. With over 100,000 family groups across the landscape, violent encounters were likely. The solution required fundamental change. To live behind protective walls, people needed reliable food without migrating. This need may have driven the invention of agriculture. Farming allowed settlements, fortifications, and survival. This transition has long puzzled archaeologists, as early farmers often worked harder and ate less well than their predecessors. The archaeological record supports the connection between defense and settlement. Early towns like Jericho and Saddle-Huyuk show clear defensive thinking. At Saddle-Huyuk, houses were packed so tightly their outer walls formed a continuous barrier, with entry only through roof hatches. Jericho featured massive stone walls, 15 meters high. These settlements were not comfortable. Close quarters brought disease and sanitation problems. Farming required grueling daily labor. People sacrificed freedom and mobility for the safety that walls provided. As fortifications spread, they took many forms, from wooden palisades to stone castles surrounded by moats. By the Middle Ages, fortified cities were common across Europe. Though threats evolved from small gangs to invading armies, the impulse to build defenses remained constant. Even after castles became obsolete, the underlying fear found new expressions. Modern homes have locked doors, alarm systems, and security cameras. The ancient need for protection simply adapted. This persistent anxiety, encoded over millennia, helps explain why people project fears onto outsiders. Ancient Greeks used barbarian for anyone whose language they could not understand. Similar terms appeared across cultures: the Persian, Susk, the Indian, Mletsha. These labels said more about the fears of those who used them than about any actual group. The real prehistoric threat has vanished. Yet the impulse to identify and defend against the others continues influencing human affairs, finding new targets even as old ones fade. What was the final check on male aggression in human history? It was the creation of laws and systems we call civilization. For millions of years, justice was personal. If someone wronged you, you or your family had to handle it, which often led to never-ending blood feuds. Civilization changed that by introducing a third party, the rule of law. Around 2100 BC, the Ur-Nammu Code became one of the first sets of written laws. It established consequences managed by the state. If you hurt someone, you paid a fine to the authorities, not just the victim. This removed the need for personal revenge. Later codes, like the famous laws of Hammurabi, were displayed in public. Everyone knew the rules. While punishments could be harsh, the principle was revolutionary. Society, not individuals, would now manage justice. These cultural rules created a buffer. They appealed to our reason and our sense of fairness, while using force against those who wouldn't comply. For the first time, people could build a life without constantly watching for threats. Civilization's greatest gift was the safety net of law that finally made peaceful family life possible. Why do cultures separated by vast oceans share the same monsters and heroes? Scottish folklorist Andrew Lang discovered the Greek tale of the Argonauts appeared almost identically in Samoa, Japan, and Finland. Winged serpents emerge from Egypt to the Americas. The story is always the same. A hero ventures into a dark place to rescue someone from a creature. Anthropologist Joseph Campbell called this the hero's journey. The hero accepts a challenge, confronts their greatest fear in an innermost cave, and through strength or intelligence, earns their reward. So where did these monsters come from? Consider the 20,000-year conflict between Cro-Magnons and Neanderthals. Around campfires, warriors described their encounters. These stories help them cope with conflict and share survival lessons. After Neanderthals vanished, accounts were embellished over generations until fact and fiction blurred. Early humans crafted stories matching their deep emotions. If certain instincts made them afraid of the dark or hairy strangers, They invented tales, giving form to those fears. The monsters they imagined looked and acted like Neanderthals, male, hairy, dangerous, living in caves or forests. They appear worldwide, from Greek satyrs to European green men. This pattern continues today. Millions report sightings of Bigfoot, the Yeti, and similar creatures. They share striking features: bipedal, covered in hair, with pronounced brow ridges. Their consistency across continents and centuries is remarkable. This universal mythology evolved into the concept of good versus evil. The Cro-Magnon campaign was reframed as heroic struggle. As religion developed, this battle found a natural home, shaping human culture in ways that persist today. Have you ever felt a flicker of fear that logic can't extinguish? We see ourselves as masters of the planet, yet ancient hatreds keep resurfacing. This theory suggests our success is built on trauma from a prehistoric conflict with Neanderthals. The fear was so intense it became hardwired into our being. Look at history. Empires rise by doing the same thing, dehumanizing the enemy and conquering without mercy. This may be an echo of that first campaign. The same instinct fuels modern politics, where groups are painted as threats to trigger ancient anxiety. It escalates from global conflicts to personal tragedies, turning suspicion into violence. It might even explain why depression in girls often spikes after puberty, linking modern psychology to ancient dangers. We build walls and weapons, yet never feel safe. The nightmares we lock out are inherited memories. We carry a mind virus that can turn peaceful people into armies. But that's not the whole story. The pressure to survive that conflict may have sparked the leap that gave us our creative minds. To the Neanderthals, we may owe not just our fears, but our ability to love, to create art, and to think. By honestly acknowledging this dual inheritance, we can use our intelligence to choose a different path.